Hello everybody, it's Nick here with Nick Tolman Music, and today we're going to go ahead and teach you guys how to change the strings on an acoustic guitar. So let's get started. Alright, so I get this question a lot, especially with new guitar students, and that is, how do I change the strings on an acoustic guitar? And first off, obviously, you can always go and have a guitar shop or someone who knows what they're doing change the strings for you. However, the longer you play, the more you realize that having to do that every time you need to change strings is going to get a little bit annoying. So learning how to do it can be really helpful. It can save you time, can save you money, and it's really not that hard to do. So let's talk about it. So first off, how do you know you need to change your strings? Well, I have a few kind of general guidelines, and one is if you ever break a string, just go ahead and change all of the strings. That's just kind of my standard thing. Unless you're in the middle of a gig and you just got to switch out one string really quick, that's fine. But in general, if I'm playing and a string breaks, that's just a good cue to me that I need to change all of my strings, and I just change out the whole set. Also, if you start to notice that you're getting some corrosion on your strings, so I've been playing on these strings for a few months now, and they are starting to get a little bit corroded right down here, especially where my fingers touch the strings, and also up here where my fingers touch the strings. That's perfectly normal. Just the oils from your fingers and your hands as you play over time are going to start to corrode the strings. It's going to affect the tone of the guitar, and it's also just going to affect the playability, the ability you have to move around easily on the strings. That's a good sign that you need to change the strings out as well. There's no hard set guide saying you should change your string every month or every 3 months. It depends on how much you're playing, and it just depends on how your strings react to the climate, the environment that your guitar is stored in, all of these factors. But the two big things, if your strings are breaking, go ahead and change them. And if you're starting to notice corrosion on the strings, go ahead and change them. The third thing would be just if you're noticing that the tone of your guitar is lacking what it used to, might be time to just change your strings and see if that helps solve that. All right. So what are you going to need to change your strings on your guitar? First off, obviously, you're going to need a new set of strings. And if you've never bought a set of strings before, it's definitely a good idea to maybe consult the manual that came with your guitar. Oftentimes they have recommendations for what types of strings you should use. Also talk to your local music shop, because they can help point you in the right direction as far as what types of strings you might want to play. In general, for new students, newer guitar players, I definitely recommend staying on lighter gauges of strings. So maybe beware of any strings that say like medium or heavy gauge, at least starting out. And as you move on and progress in playing, you might move to something like that. But I play an Elixir Nano Web string, and this is a light gauge. So this is these are 12s. And that number is referencing the smallest gauge string, which is a 12 for the high E. All right, so that's the type of string I'm going to be using. Also, you are going to need some basic cleaning supplies. So over here I have a guitar polish and a fretboard conditioner. I'm going to use both of these. When you pull the strings off, it's a great time to get your instrument cleaned and taken care of in that way. Also, you are going to need, at a minimum, either a set of pliers or a bridge pin remover. Okay, so these bridge pins on an acoustic guitar, these little pegs that are down on the bridge holding the strings in, those have to come out. So again, you can just use a standard set of pliers, or you can use a bridge pin remover. It's a special tool that'll pop those out. A cleaning cloth. So I've got a cleaning cloth right here. You're going to need that. You're going to need some string cutters. And that is a minimum. Some other things that might be helpful would be a guitar peg string winder. So you're going to be winding the strings a lot. If you want to do it a little quicker, you can use one of these. I actually often don't even use one, but you certainly can. All right. that's all you're gonna need. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the very first step is going to be to remove the strings. All right, so on an acoustic guitar, it's no big deal. This is, for me, this is where the string winder comes in really handy, is just when I'm just taking these off. You can pop that on there, and it's a lot faster for removing these strings. Make sure you're turning it the right way so you don't snap a string. Okay, so I'm just gonna wind that. I'm doing the high E right now. And that's we're just gonna go until I can basically kind of just pull that off. Okay, I'm just gonna set that aside for now. Do the next string, the B. All right, same thing, just gonna wind. All right, so be careful when you're taking these off. The ends of the strings are sharp. I just poked myself and I'm bleeding, so yeah, watch out for that. All right, so I think I got the blood under control. We're gonna continue. You're gonna repeat that process and just remove all the strings, okay? Okay, so now all the strings are off to this point. There's the bridge pins are still in down here. So we're gonna go ahead and take those out. Now, they don't really matter. They're not like specifically sized. However, just out of habit over the years, I've always kept track of which one is in which string. Who knows? Maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. But if you buy a new set, they're all exactly the same size. It really doesn't matter which one goes back where. But I'm just gonna pull them off. They should come out very easily. You might have to pull on it just a little bit if it's set in there pretty good. But they shouldn't be super tight in there anyways, all right? So I'm just keep pulling these out. That one was a titch tight, no big deal. No problem at all. If for some reason you pull one of these out and they are broken or really worn out or something like that, you can always buy a new set of bridge pins. They're super cheap, no problem. I'll actually put a link in the description below for you, and you can check those out, all right? It's actually not a bad idea to have an extra set of those in your case anyway, in case you lose one or break one or something like that, because I have done that. All right, so here we go. Strings are coming out, and these are just gonna get set aside and thrown away. All right, so next step. Now that the strings are completely off, this is a perfect opportunity to do a little bit of maintenance on your guitar. The one thing that I highly recommend that you do every time you change your strings is at least take care of your fretboard, okay? The wood on your fretboard, it easily gets neglected over time because it's always covered by strings. And so this is a great time to do that, all right? So I have my fretboard conditioner here. This one is made by Gibson. There's a lot of different brands out there. I'm just gonna shake this up a little bit. So all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take this and I'm just gonna wet my polish cloth here, like so. Just got a little dab on there, and I'm just gonna start just kind of taking care of each fret. Just kind of scrubbing it down, making sure it's clean, and working this stuff down into the wood. This fretboard conditioner is going to do a couple things. First off, it's just going to kind of seep down into the grains of the wood on your fretboard, and it's just going to help keep that wood healthy. It's going to help prevent it from drying out and cracking. It's going to feel a lot better as a player as your fingers move along the fretboard. It's going to help the wood just be smoother and more playable. All of these things are really important. All right, it's gonna help it look better, all of that. All right, so just go ahead and repeat that process all the way up the neck. All right, so once you've gone all the way up and down the fretboard, if there's any kind of wetness, if it's looking a little bit wet from the oils, that's okay. It shouldn't be excessive because you're just putting a little bit on there anyway, but you can go ahead and just let that sit, let it soak in and dry while we do the rest of this, all right? So the next step is we're gonna just run a real quick polish over the guitar. Now, most acoustic guitars, they shouldn't need a ton of this. This is really just to help the guitar look vibrant and nice, and also just to help keep the finish healthy and clean as well. So I'm gonna just use a little high gloss polish here, and this is also made by Gibson. I'm gonna do a very small amount on the cleaning cloth and just go across the whole body of the guitar. Now as I'm doing this, one thing that I kind of forgot to mention at the beginning that's really helpful when you are changing your strings and doing this kind of work is just finding a good place to do this work. So right now I'm actually working on the kitchen table, and I have a blanket laid out over it just to kind of protect the guitar so it's not laying on a hard surface. And this works out really well for me. You can do it on the floor if you would like to, but I highly recommend just laying something down, a towel or a blanket or something like that, just to make sure that your guitar is nice and protected. And yeah, just finding a good place to do it, but really anywhere works. If you have a nice workbench or something, that's great, but not everybody has that, so. Okay, so now I'm gonna go on the opposite side, the dry side of the cleaning cloth, and I'm just gonna go ahead and wipe that over one more time. Just kind of buff out that polish a little bit, get this thing looking nice and shiny, get all the fingerprints off of it, get all the dust off of the headstock up here. Okay, so I'm actually also going to put a little bit of fretboard conditioner down on the bridge down here because it's very similar. It's rosewood just like the fretboard, and it's also unfinished just like the fretboard as far as there's no glossy finish on it. So I'm just going to put that conditioner on to keep that wood healthy as well. Okay, so now that the guitar is all polished and clean, the fretboard has been taken care of, we are ready to put some new strings on. All right, so I just opened up my set of elixirs here, and as I open, there are 6 different little packages, and there's different ways that string manufacturers do this. Some of them will have all the strings together and they're color coded, and there's a guide on the box that will tell you, oh, the red one is the smallest string or the first string, and you just kind of go from there. So this one also has the guide. It says the E string or first string is the 12, the second string is the 16, third string is the 24, so on and so forth. So if you're confused about which string goes where, always consult the box that the strings came in, and that'll help you out, okay? All right, so let's start. It doesn't really matter which string you start with. For whatever reason, I tend to always start with the low E string. Maybe I'm doing that wrong, but that's all right. So here we go, low E string. We're gonna go ahead and just unwind this, and there we go. So we've got the string. You'll notice on one end of the string, there is a ball, and the other end of the string is just a kind of a 4-inch or so wire, and that's that. So the ends look different. All right, so the end with the ball is going to go into the hole down here on the bridge, and make sure you're doing it on the correct side, where your low string should be, right? And there should be no problem. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick that down in, and really it doesn't matter how far, it can just go right down in. And I'm gonna grab one of the bridge pins here, and there's a little groove in the bridge pin. The groove should go against the string, okay? And I'm just gonna go ahead and push that down on in, and I don't have to jam it or anything. I'm just pushing it in. I'm gonna hold it there, and I'm gonna pull the string upward, okay, as far as I can. All right, and that's that. I don't need to jam, but I am gonna try to pull that string upward, okay? Now, over here, basically I'm just gonna turn the tuning peg until this string can go straight in like that. Just I'm going up the neck and straight into the hole, right? I don't want to like come at it from like over here or from over here. I want to just be able to go straight in. That's just kind of my preference, how I like to get that set. I'm going to go in. And I'm going to pull that all the way through until I have about, for the lower strings, for the strings that are wound, the gold colored strings, so your top two strings, your E and B, are not wound, they're just a solid wire. Those ones, you don't have to hold it up as high, but for all the wound strings, I tend to hold it about 6 inches. So I'm here right at about the 15th fret, and I'm holding from the fretboard to where the string is, again, about 6 inches. I'm holding that, all right? And all I'm gonna do right now is just hold this string with my right hand here, there. And I'm gonna start turning my tuning peg here counterclockwise. And that is going to be tightening the string. Now, once I get it to about perpendicular to where I was, I've gone about 90 degrees on that turn. What I'm gonna do is start pulling ever so slightly this direction backwards, just to keep some tension on the string. Now, the reason I waited to start doing that is because if I would have pulled before, I would have just pulled the string right out, right? You need to have turned the peg enough that when you're pulling back, that you're not pulling the string right out of the peg, all right? All right, so now that that peg has gone about 180 degrees, I can start to put some pretty good backward tension on here. I just wanna keep it nice and tight as I'm winding. That'll keep a nice tight wind of string on your peg. You don't want it to be all loose and flopping around, okay? Now, for me, as I begin to continue to tighten, I like to just watch and make sure that the string is going on and staying under. Now, there are different schools of thought on this. Some people like to have one wind go above the excess string and one below. For me, I've never really cared that much about that. I just want to make sure that it's winding nicely and not getting all mangled, and making sure that it all just goes nice on there. Now, the only thing to make sure for me is I want to make sure that you get at least one full circle around that peg, all right? If you have a little bit more, that's okay, but if you don't have one entire wrap of string around the peg, it means you weren't holding it up high enough over here, and you just want to make sure that you get that. It's better to end up with maybe a little bit too much on the peg than to not have enough on there, okay? So there we go, I'm just tightening, I'm still putting backward pressure, but this string here is getting to where it's almost all the way down to the fretboard. All right, so now you'll notice that as it begins to get tightened, that the string may adjust over here. So you just gotta keep an eye out. If that end pin pops out a little bit, it's okay. It's not that big a deal, but what I am gonna do, as soon as I get that string to where has some tension here on its own, I'm just gonna go ahead and just keep my finger on the end pin and kind of keep it in place. I'm not gonna jam it. I'm just gonna keep my finger on that end pin as I tighten. And I'm not gonna tighten all the way, but I am just gonna kind of get it in the general ballpark of where that needs to be. All right, so let's go ahead and try the next string. We're gonna go ahead and, for my set of strings, the next one is going to be the 42, and that's gonna be your low A string. We're gonna repeat the process. So again, the ball goes down into the bridge, the end pin, the groove goes against the string, and the end pin goes down. Pull that string up, get that ball seated up in there as high as you can. I'm gonna set my tuning peg here to where the hole on the peg is directly in line with the neck. That way I can just go straight on in. Okay. right? So as the strings get smaller, you can do just ever so slightly, maybe less height distance between your 15th fret and your hand up here. I ended up with a little more string on that last peg than I generally like, so I'm just going to do a titch less. Anywhere between 4 and 6 inches is generally just fine here. Good, and right now I'm not putting any backward pressure, because if I pull back right now, this is going to come out of the peg, which we don't want, right? So I'm not putting any pressure, but I am going to start turning this peg counterclockwise till it's about 90 degrees, a little more than 90 degrees, and now I'm going to start putting just a little bit of back pressure on that string, keeping it tight between here and here. Wrap around again, and now it has gone about a full 180 degrees, so now I'm putting more pressure. You might find that it's hard to keep pressure on the strings because they're slippery. I'm just kind of pinching it a little bit between my thumb and middle finger there. Whatever you got to do to just get a little tension. And now I'm just keeping tension on, and I'm tightening and making sure that that gets wound onto the peg cleanly and nicely. And it's doing its own thing. It's winding downward, which is right. It's going to naturally kind of do what it needs to do as long as there's good tension. I ended up with 2 full wraps around that peg, which is about perfect where I want it, right? And you want at least 1 full wrap of string around the peg, but 2 is great. Okay, again, now that that tension is holding on its own, I'm just going to keep my finger here on the bridge pin while I kind of get that in the general ballpark. Right? We're going to go ahead and repeat this process for the next 2 strings, then we'll talk about the B and E string here in a minute. So here we go. Okay, so now I'm working on the B string, and the reason I'm kind of tuning in on this one is basically just, you'll notice that the process feels a little bit different on the top 2 strings because they're not wound, all right? So again, it's just the same. I'm gonna stick the ball end down in, and I'm going to grab the end pin, make sure that the groove is against the string, and pull up. It's kind of hard to actually pull up because this string is so slippery, right? But that's all right. We're going to align the hole on the peg again so I can stick this straight in. Good. Now, again, you don't need quite as much distance. I mean, it's about the same. Around 4 inches should be fine here. From your 15th fret up to your finger here. And then I'm just going to start turning and making sure that I'm turning counterclockwise, which is going to feel backwards from this other end. You can always flip your guitar around or stand on the other side of a table if you want to make sure that you're pulling that counterclockwise like you should. I'm watching that end pin, making sure that it's not popping out. And just kind of... All right, about 90 degrees here, so I'm going to start putting some back pressure on this string. Good. And then I'm just going to start turning. And really, the process is exactly the same. I only stopped here just to kind of mention that with these smaller strings, you'll notice that you don't need quite as much distance there to get it to wrap all the way around. But you still need at least 4 inches between that 15th fret and your hand that's holding the string here. And now I'm just putting that back pressure on. It's going on nice and clean. I like. I've got one full wrap. Looks like I'm gonna get another one, which will be just perfect. Good. Pressure's here, so I'm gonna go ahead and just keep my finger on this end pin. All right, obviously it's not in tune yet. We're getting there. All right, let's go ahead and put this last string on. We'll go from there. Now, I didn't really mention before, it's kind of self-explanatory, but as you're putting these on, you'll just want to make sure, oops, if I can get this. I'm sure there's a natural kind of indentation where the string has been resting on your saddle and on your nut up here. Obviously, you just want to make sure that the strings end up sitting in those same spots. And that'll be just fine, just right into the little indentations that are there for your strings. All right, get this guy lined up. All right, so right there, you'll notice that as I was tightening, there was kind of a pop, and all of a sudden there was no tension in the string. Don't let that freak you out. All that's happening is that ball that's down inside of the bridge is just working its way up and getting seated into that end pin. And sometimes if you don't have it pulled all the way up, when you're tightening, it'll seat up. So it can be alarming, but don't let it freak you out. It's not gonna hurt anything. But I am just kind of keeping my finger here on that as I tighten, because sometimes those end pins can just pop out as that process is happening. Cool. All right, so all the strings are in their basic place. I've got them kind of roughly tuned up. Now I'm gonna grab the tuner, and I'm just using a tuner here on my phone. This is my favorite guitar tuner on the phone. It's called Cadenza. I think it might cost like $2 or something on the App Store, but it works really well and I use it a lot. So Cadenza, here we go. So I'm starting on my high E. So it's registering as a C right now. Got to bring it up some more. C sharp, D. And again, I'm keeping my finger on the end pin down here. Just a little bit of pressure, making sure that end pin doesn't pop out. D sharp and E. Cool. I'm right at E. That's definitely gonna come out of tune here in a minute, but it's all right. We're gonna tune this a few times. So we're gonna go ahead and tune all the strings. Same process. Keeping some pressure on the end pin as you bring it up into tune. All right, so I did my first round of tuning. Now all I'm gonna do is just kind of stretch these strings a little bit. I'm just like right here at the top of the sound hole. I'm just gonna stretch each string a little bit. Basically what we're doing is we're just getting these strings to settle into where they are, getting those balls down in the bridge to settle. Just doing a little stretch on each of these strings, nothing crazy. Okay, and we're gonna tune it again. Here we go. All right, so I tuned it all that second time. Now I'm just gonna play it a little bit, still just trying to get these strings to stretch and settle in, so. All right, so I've been playing it here for a few minutes and I'm gonna go ahead and tune it a third time. At this point, you shouldn't have to be putting pressure on the bridge pins because they should be pretty well set. So I'm just getting this thing in tune. Okay, so we've got the strings on, we've tuned them again, we've played the guitar, we've tuned them a third time. They should be pretty well set. You are gonna notice that the strings go out of tune relatively quickly here for the next day or two, or for the next couple hours if you're playing right away. And that's okay. They're just settling in, they're just stretching in, and that's fine. The last step is getting rid of all of the excess string up here on the headstock. And that's super easy, just some standard like wire cutters should do the trick. Now, generally I like to leave this excess string on, especially if this is your first or second or maybe even third time changing strings. You haven't done it that much and you're not super confident about how well everything is seated. Leave this excess string on for a day or so, because if one of these end pins pops out and you have to reset it, it's better to have that excess string there so you can get everything set again, right? But when it's time to clip, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna clip just about 1/4 of an inch away from the tuning peg, and I'm just gonna be extra careful to make sure that I am not clipping any strings that are under tension, right? I do not want my string to snap, okay? I'm just gonna go through each of these strings real quick, clip those off, and again, I just have about 1/4 of an inch of string that's sticking out of that. Not a lot at all. And that's all there is to it. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, please leave them in the comment below. If you weren't already aware, this month, February 2021, we are giving away a string changing kit on our monthly giveaway. So yeah, check that out. The end of the year in 2021, we're giving away a Fender Strat. So yeah, definitely stick around, check out our monthly giveaways, and hope to see you soon.